Yeah, I didn't mean to raise your hand, you stopped talking.
Okay, so would someone like to share what you came up with how do you know when you know something? Yes.
For example, when somebody highlights certain issue in front of me, and I feel like I have certain information regarding this topic, then I know that I know something.
Okay. Yeah, you can take that information and put it into what you already know about it.
Yes, highlight around.
Okay. Well, we're going to come back to that concept of conceptual framework, so that's important. Yes.
Yeah, once you talk about the item, your colleague or your friend, and you can compare information with your colleague's information about this topic.
Okay, good. Nice discussions.
If you know something well, you will be able to explain it confidently.
You'll be able to experience it?
You will be confident.
Oh, confidence. Explain it with confidence. Yes. Okay. Anything else?
Not yet.
Yes.
When I prepare presentations, I criticize myself, I review the literature, and I understand if I know something about, or if I miss any new information. So it is a way to understand.
Yeah, so you're criticizing yourself. That's that metacognition. Do I know what I'm talking about here? I'm preparing a presentation, for example. Okay, anything? One more. Yeah.
Another way of knowing is that when you realize that others don't know, in a debate, they're unable to solve it. You have the idea, I know. They don't know.
We were just in India, and this scientist we were working with in another workshop, he had this wonderful T-shirt, and it says, "I'm not arguing, I'm just explaining why I'm right." It's very funny. So sometimes we do know things, and we're working. Okay, how about when your students know something? How do you know when your students know something?
Yes, all thing I depends on the body language, what's there.
Body language?
Body language, yes.
Okay.
This is one point.
Okay, one more, and then Tara's next.
Yes, another point. I use friends store
Okay.
to testing if they understand me about the lecture or not.
So you're listening to your students. Okay, Tara.
So receiving more question from students that means they are still with me in the homepage.
So the questions that they ask. Okay.
Active participation.
Active participation. That can be tricky. Some students may be shy, right? But they sometimes know, but they're shy. So sometimes that's we know, but sometimes we don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, you can ask a question and see their answer.
Right. So all of what you just said is about this interaction, right?
Other question. I met one student ask the other, and the other explain something to his
Yeah.
friend, student.
Yeah,
So
the
we
peer,
have to
peer.
connect the answers.
Good. Okay. Last one.
Quizzes.
Okay, quizzes is another way, yeah.
My students like to attend my class.
That doesn't, I don't know, they can attend your class for other reasons. Maybe they like something in your class, but okay, great. So I'm going to give you a few tips from researchers that talk about the concept of testing versus studying. And we'll be reinforcing these concepts throughout the workshop. So this research was done by Rodinger and Karpicki in 2006. They have extended this work, and it's actually quite famous. So what they did is they took a content area, and they asked students to study that content for 5 minutes, and then take a break, like 15 minutes, and then study again for 5, take a break, study, study. And then they took an exam after 5 minutes related to the content and 1 week. That was one group. There was another experimental group that studied the material, and then they were tested on the material. Then they took a break and they got a new question based on the material. So they did this repeatedly, and they also took the same test 5 minutes and 1 week later. And what they showed is that after 5 minutes, the group that studied did better than the group that studied and was tested a lot. But that's not the case for what happens after 1 week. After 1 week, long-term memory, it was the students who studied more, that studied first and then were tested frequently that actually learn the material long term. And that's because testing creates a neural pathway that helps students retrieve that information, and it's not just in temporary storage. So what was fascinating is they've done a lot of work in this area, and they know that information is not stored like a videotape, that you can just play back memories. Basically, retrieval, having to go through the process of retrieving and doing that multiple times, like through testing, for example, not passive learning, actually modifies the way the brain works. So what was fascinating about this is that students don't understand this, and they are very comfortable with reading and reading and reading. And so if you look at the results and you ask students, how much, these two different groups, how much will you remember in 1 week's time? Well, we know the data, the group that did the testing a lot actually remembered more in 1 week, but that's not how they felt. The group that studied more felt comfortable with the material. So this is kind of a cognitive dissonance in that the students who were tested weren't confident. They actually thought that they would do poorly, but they did better. Because having to go through the process of solving a problem is challenging, and it maybe challenges your confidence. So this was an interesting finding, but the point here is that testing is the better way to learn, not passive transfer of information. So there's another interesting study that was done. I can't go through everything with you, but this was another one. And they took one group, and the individuals took their study time and put it close together and then took a test. And I mean, they would study for an hour, have a half-hour break, and study. Whereas another group would study over a week's period of time. They would study 1 day, skip a day or two, study, etc., and then take a test. What they found is that the group that masked their studying together did better on an immediate test, but the group that actually had a delayed test 1 week later, they actually did much better. And so it's the same thing as the testing effect in that forgetting information, you forget parts of it but not all of it, and so once you study again later, it reinforces that same neural pathway. So it's getting away from familiarity into the concept of real learning. Yes?
There's a saying about this that reminded me this test. Tell me I forget, show me I remember, involve me I understand.
And it's a wonderful phrase that really sums that up. That's right. You have to do in order to learn. And that is the summary of what I'm trying to impart today. So thank you for that. And it gets at the concept that learning's not easy. It's actually these kinds of things when you're tested or you space out your learning of information. It's more difficult, but it's better effort on behalf of the neural pathways you're building. So the second major finding for how people learn is that we have expert learners have conceptual frameworks, and they assimilate information in their area better because they have conceptual framework. So let's take an example of that from chess. Okay, this is yet another research study that was done in the 70s, a famous one. And here's how it works. They took 3 different groups of chess players, a master's chess player, a intermediate chess player, and a beginner chess player, and they showed them a chessboard for 30 seconds. So I'm only giving you 15 seconds, but what I want to know is how many pieces can you place on the board correctly? 1, 2. Yeah, it's difficult, but this is what they did, but they gave them 30 seconds, okay? So they did this test, and they did this experiment 7 times, 7 trials with the same board. So this was the first trial that you just did, and they saw how many pieces could these 3 groups put on the chessboard the first time. Then they did it again, and they did it again until 7 times. So what is not shown here is a graph of how these different groups did. I would rather you graph that out. So work with your neighbor and draw the graph. What do you think at the different groups, how did they perform over 7 trials? Okay? So draw a graph.